Greetings YouTube viewers and welcome to another video on the Ian Bullock channel. Today it's Tuesday the 23rd of May 2023 and we find ourselves at Gorleston Old Cemetery here in Gorleston-On-Sea near Great Yarmouth, Norfolk on the east coast of England in the UK. Now, I've a bit of a confession to make here, for despite being brought up in Gorleston in the 1970s and the early 1980s, I've never, as far as I can recall, so much as set foot in this cemetery before. And that's a shame really, because cemeteries like this are not only places of tranquility and quiet reflection, but are also a window to the past. Every gravestone could potentially tell a story of our much loved and much missed ancestors. Sadly, however, those tales of local lives lived and lost are not always chronicled in any great detail. Many of the gravestones remain a mystery, and when I visit places like this, I often wander around thinking, who were these people? How did they spend their lives? How come some of them lived so long when others died so young? Do they have any surviving families, and does anyone come to visit their graves anymore? It might sound an odd thing to say, but graveyards are often the very places where history really does come to life. You'll see that we have some beautiful weather here in Norfolk today for this video, with sunshine and clear blue skies, but quite a brisk breeze, as you can probably hear in the background. So in today's YouTube video at Gorleston Old Cemetery, I want to focus on one grave in particular, that of Sissy Drummee, which is on the left of the picture here. Initially, I thought she might have been called Cecilia, Celia, or Cynthia, or something a touch more formal, but everything I've read about her, including the inscription on her gravestone here, calls her Sissy. Now you might notice that unlike the majority of graves and memorials here in the old cemetery, Sissy's is a gleaming brilliant white, and I'll talk a little more about her recent restoration later. Now, many local viewers watching this video of course will be familiar with this distinctive memorial. Having not previously set foot in Gorleston Cemetery myself, I'd never heard of it or come across it, which saddens me in a way, and that's where good old Facebook comes in. Yes, I know there's a lot of old rubbish on Facebook, but actually I find that social media sites can be full of fascinating stories, interesting information and lots of local history. And I would simply never have heard of Sissy Drummee's grave here at Gorleston if it hadn't have been for Martin Swan, Swanee as he's known, and the excellent Facebook group he runs called Great Yarmouth and Surroundings, the good old days, the original and the best. Cissie Drummee, it seems, led a fairly ordinary life in Great Yarmouth and Gorleston in the early 20th century. But while her life might have been ordinary, what we see here today I think is extraordinary, the most beautiful memorial carved in her image and made from Italian marble. I'd probably go so far as to say that this memorial is unique. Indeed, it'd be interesting to know whether anything similar exists in other cemeteries locally or nationally. I doubt it, to be honest. Sissy was born in 1905 to Benjamin and Florence Drummee, and her birth would have been a cause for a great deal of celebration for the family after much sorrow, because just 2 years earlier the couple had very sadly lost their first child, also called Florence, aged only 20 months. Little Florence is buried here too in this grave. When Sissy was aged 6, her father took over the Mitre public house in Great Yarmouth with his wife, who covered for him at the pub during the First World War years, while he served as a military policeman. The Mitre, or the Mitre Tavern, was in George Street, but is now closed. Over the years, local people will recall that it's also been known as Fagin's, Speaker's, the Phoenix, the Cabby Bar, and most recently, Lily's Wine Bar and Fine Dining. After their time at the Mitre Tavern, the Drummee family then took over the running of the Admiral Seymour pub in Salisbury Road. I believe that Sissy helped to run the pub and would have been quite a well-known figure in that neighbourhood. Tragedy, unfortunately, was to strike again for Mr and Mrs Drummee, because poor Sissy died on October the 17th, 1933, aged just 28. The Yarmouth couple had sadly lost both of their beloved daughters. What we're seeing here on the right-hand side of Sissy's memorial is an inscription for Florence Gertrude Drummee, the couple's first child, who very sadly died on March the 1st, 1903, aged only 1 year and 8 months. Sissy's grieving parents had this beautiful memorial to her made, and I hope you'll agree it's a superbly crafted and touching tribute to a much-loved young woman. There's a belief that it was sculpted by skilled Italian stonemasons because of the sheer quality of workmanship we can see here. Now, there was more tragedy to come for the Drummee family, I'm sad to report. His heart still broken from losing a second daughter, Benjamin Drummee himself died aged 55, just over a year after young Sissy's death. He died at his home in Garnham Road, Gorleston. So let's just take a closer look at this lovely statue. Sissy is wearing a long but simple gown with a V-neck belted at the waist. She has a necklace of beads, possibly pearls, though they look to me more like fashionable beads of the interwar years. Her hair is short but pretty and gently curled in what might have been called a Marcel wave, typical of the period. Just look at the detail and texture in the fabric of her gown, so beautifully and precisely carved. It's all a little bit Downton Abbey, this gorgeously elegant styling. Sissy is depicted here seated and leaning forward in silent contemplation, her head resting on her left hand, almost as if she's sitting at a grave and paying her own respects. In her hand we see a posy of flowers, roses maybe, gathered from the garden. Some petals have fallen onto the plinth below. I really do wonder how long this must have taken to sculpt and at what cost. I've really no idea about these things, but it seems to me that back in its day this would have been a breathtakingly bold and expensive display of grief. Sissy and her pose may be modest and demure, but this would have been an extravagant and costly memorial, particularly for a Yarmouth publican in the economic slump of the 1930s between the two world wars. At the very front of the memorial, underneath Sissy's sculpture, of course, we have these inscriptions to Sissy Violet Drummee, who died in 1933, aged 28, and below her poor father Benjamin Thomas, dying aged 55 in 1934. Now, we don't actually know why Sissy died so young at the age of 28, but it's clear, I think, from the inscriptions here talking about bearing the ills of this life and being done with all sorrow and pain, that she must have had health problems during her lifetime, or perhaps in her mid to late 20s. Just round on the other side of the memorial, we have this inscription for Gertrude Clifford, who died in 1934, aged 60. I don't actually know who this lady was, and I'm wondering whether she might have been Benjamin's sister, because the dates look about right, but that's a little bit of a mystery to me. So what we have here is a finely crafted tribute to a much-loved and missed daughter, and I think it's great that people like me are still talking about Sissy today, 90 years since her passing. Just for the sake of balance, I probably need to say that some people aren't that crazy about Sissy's memorial. And yes, I suppose it's not everyone's cup of tea. It doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the graves and memorials, let's be honest. But personally, I think it's rather fabulous. Now then, YouTube viewers, if you look carefully here, you'll notice something unusual, for this appears to be a ring on Sissy's left hand, a wedding band even. Now, as far as we know, Sissy was not married when she died, so the wedding ring is a bit of a mystery. Also, there have been discussions about this memorial saying that the lady we see here before us looks much older than 28, and therefore is not Sissy, but is actually her mother, hence the wedding band. Some people have said that the statue is indeed Sissy, but for some reason is shown wearing her mother's wedding ring. Maybe she had been engaged in her 20s, but her early demise meant the wedding was never able to go ahead. Maybe her parents for some reason wanted her to be portrayed in this marble sculpture as a married woman. We may never know the answer to that, and it remains a bit of a puzzle. And I suppose this makes us wonder how this statue was ever created in the first place. Was it based on an image of Sissy, a photograph perhaps, or a description from her bereaved parents? Indeed, is this a genuine likeness of Sissy herself, or perhaps merely a generic and pretty young woman of the period, maybe a 1930s interpretation of a muse or some other romantic figure? We just don't know whether this statue is even of Sissy Drummee herself. As for Sissy's mother, the widowed Florence Drummee, I'm not sure how she spent the rest of her days, having lost both of her daughters and her husband. After Benjamin's death, she moved to the Nest at 19 Addison Road, Gorleston, and in 1935 curiously became one of the first owners of a telephone, her number being Gorleston 332. The Admiral Seymour pub, which the couple once ran with Sissy, closed in 2008 and has now been converted into flats. So this grave has been surveyed by the Recording Archive for Public Sculpture in Norfolk and Suffolk. Now, according to them, Proudfoot of Lowestoft are listed in local directories as monumental stonemasons around the time. But they say that because of the quality of workmanship in Sissy's melancholy pose and the rendering of her textured dress being so exceptional, they think that a commission like this may have been undertaken by Italian craftsmen working in Italian marble, and I can quite believe it. Now, throughout this video, I hope you'll have noticed that Sissy's memorial is currently looking very bright and tidy, having been cleaned up and restored recently by local volunteers. It had become weathered, dirty and peppered with patches of green growth. Martin Swanee, tells me that Sissy's memorial and a number of other graves here in Gorleston Old Cemetery have been restored by people from Project Nova, a forces employment charity programme which supports veterans in contact with the justice system and helps to provide stability in their lives. Project Nova runs a community benefit programme called Past and Present, which encourages veterans to survey, photograph and provide general garden maintenance for scattered war graves across the UK. Now, here in Gorleston, the scope has been broadened from war graves to include notable and historic graves and memorials, and all those who carried out restoration are Operation Nova Past and Present programme volunteers, either veterans or civilian friends, headed by military grave restorer Steve Davis, who's a qualified stonemason, and he makes the decisions as to whether a memorial is suitable for restoration. I must say the guys who cleaned up Sissy's sculpture have done a fantastic job, and all credit to them. I hear that the team are now looking to see whether that little bit of damage to Sissy's cheek can also be restored and repaired. I'm also told that restored graves like Sissy's are possibly to be included in forthcoming guided heritage walks around Gorleston Old Cemetery, which sounds fascinating. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you found the story of Sissy Drummee and her exquisite marble memorial interesting, and I hope that in some small way I'm able to celebrate Sissy's life globally by uploading this video to YouTube. If you're ever passing Gorleston Old Cemetery, please take a look. If you have any additional information, views or comments on this video and the story of Sissy, please contribute to the comments below on YouTube. So this is Ian Bullock in Gorleston Old Cemetery in Norfolk, UK, and it's Tuesday, May the 23rd, 2023.